Welcome, everyone. We will be starting very soon. We're going to give folks a few minutes to get in the room, let the internet do its thing, and we'll get started with the program. Lots of folks coming in. For those who haven't heard it, buenos dias. Welcome to the program. We will be starting maybe about a minute as people are sort of slowly making their way in, settling in. We'll be using a Q&A function. We'll be reminding folks about the entire session, but please feel free to just introduce yourself. Maybe where you're coming from, what organization you're with, love to see you in the room with us. Morning, or at least California morning. Yeah. You're all here. I think now might be a good time to get started. I think we're at a pretty solid group of people. Hopefully folks will be joining on as we go. Welcome everyone. We're so happy that you're here and in this space with us. We also want to take a second to thank our BMP staff who's in the background sort of making this webinar happen through all of our comms and even today managing slides and all that wonderful tech stuff. And also a big thank you to our esteemed panelists who you'll get to know a little bit later on. If you haven't done so already, please introduce yourself in the chat, name what organization you're with and what part of the country you're coming from. We'd love to know who's in the room with us. My name is Hector Malvido. I'm the Senior Manager of Partnerships, and I'm with the Building Movement Project, right? We're an organization that's dedicated to supporting and pushing the nonprofit sector to tackle some of the most significant social issues through infrastructure, capacity building, and research. For today's sort of housekeeping things around just how to access today and the Zoom tech. If you have any tech issues, we have one of our staff, wonderful Jazz, is named BMP Tech Support. If you have any issues, please send them a private message and they'll hopefully help you out. We also have a Q&A function. If any questions are coming up for you all as we're sort of in the panel, please, or throughout any of the research or the presentations, please feel free to share them. There'll be a Q&A portion where we'll try to answer some of those questions later on. And again, the webinar is being recorded. We're going to be sharing everything that's being shared in the chat. It could be links and presentations. So please look out for an email once the webinar is all set. Before we sort of jump in, we wanted to see who's in the room with us. So we're launching a quick poll here. If folks want to take a quick moment to answer and just to see who's in the room with us today. Awesome, thank you. It looks like we have a lot of nonprofit sort of consultants or capacity builders, which is great. Also, I see some a little bit of folks from the direct service staff, like 30%, 9% frontline staff. Great to see, and also some service organization leadership. Love to see our advocacy groups and our funders, and also, yeah, other folks who are here. Thanks for being here. It's good to know who's in the room with us. So I'm going to quickly go over the agenda for today. Again, just a quick sort of overview of what we're going to be doing. I'm going to be introducing a summary of the security wellbeing framework, right? The reason why we're all here, and sort of like one of the main things that we do here at Building Movement Project under our service and social change work. Then we'll be listening to Emily Rogers with the independent sector to sort of share a little bit more about what they're seeing, the insights that they're seeing in their research this past year. And then we'll go into our Q&A, sorry, our panel discussion. And then if you stick around to the end, we'll be sharing a lot more information about this upcoming cohort, our second cohort of the Security and Wellbeing Framework that's going to be launching this June. And then we'll be closing. So let's jump right in. So we wanted to start off with Building Movement Project sort of work and how the framework was created, right? So for the past 20 years, BMP has been engaging with direct service staff in a variety of ways that, I've always sort of taken stock of the potential these groups have to make a difference in their communities. A few years ago, BMP actually convened a cohort of service providers in New Mexico, the goal of which was to connect them and not just connect each of the organizations with each other, but also find ways to interact with their constituency a little bit more intentionally. And from that cohort, sort of conversations started emerging about what lane service providers are currently occupying and sort of how they wanted to transform their role to sort of impact some of the systems that really create the need to begin with, right? From these conversations and these new sets of goals and sort of refocusing their efforts emerged the Security and Wellbeing Framework, which is what we're going to be looking at today. In the most simple terms, it's a framework that supports service organizations to begin and expand their social change work. It's like a spectrum in which there isn't a one right or wrong. There isn't like the best way or the worst way. It's really just an opportunity to sort of visualize and see what are ways that direct service providers can, through incremental shifts, begin moving towards sort of broad social change as a part of their programming, as a part of their belief systems, and really as a part of how they organize themselves and their communities as a whole. You're going to be hearing us say the words a lot, security and well-being, and we'll get to that in a second. But when we think about service organizations, we're sort of we think about them being focused on social good, right? Something that is valuable and indispensable. And sort of the framework sort of connects some of the different assets and resources and sort of the inherent power that service providers has in a way that moves them towards being able to make significant broad social change work with the strengths that they carry, right? What are service organizations exceptionally good at? They're good at building trust in the community. They're good at building partnerships across different organizations, having connections with the government. And how do we use those intentionally towards something that's bigger and has an impact on the systems, again, that create the need? So what do we mean by from security to well-being, right? So when we talk about security, we often are speaking to what organizations already do so well. If you click on the next button, we are sort of talking about the different services that help stabilize communities, right? Life-saving, from providing affordable housing or rapid rehousing to people experiencing homelessness, or services for immigrant communities, after-school education programs, food and childcare supports, and all of the above, right? The impact that providing security through service organization work is, again, like so important and a pillar of how some communities stay afloat and are stabilized through life. What we mean by well-being is we think about the role that service organizations can play, right? The role that they play in the liberation of systems of exclusion and oppression that create the need to stabilize communities in the first place. The role that they play in growing and thriving, and the growing and the thriving of those communities outside of the nonprofit sector, further enshrining their self-determination. The role that they play in lifting up and centering the constituent's voice, to inform and have agency over how these systems are shaped. And finally, sort of the role that they play in sharing power and opportunities for communities they serve to reimagine and steward the creation of a new and liberatory society. This framework taps into the potential of service organizations to, again, affect broad social change based on what they already bring to the table. The ultimate outcome of this framework is to guide groups to be a service and social change organization. So if you go to the next slide, please. It's worth mentioning, right, that organizations are all sort of in a different place along the spectrum. Some may have engaged in social change work in the past. This might be their first time ever even sort of getting involved in this type of work. We've broken the framework into sort of a series of different engaging modules that help organizations explore their current challenges, opportunities, and different ways they can integrate social change work in a way that makes sense. It's designed to work with what organizations have at their disposal, such as the trust in their communities and knowledge and needs of systemic issues, and so on. It also thinks through what ways organizations can grow their understanding of root causes, build and deepen partnerships with community, and even how it supports the leadership of the communities and people they serve. What you're looking at here is sort of a very big bird's eye view of what the framework is all about. But if you look at those top 3 arrows that go from providing resources to broad social change, let's jump into those real quick. So the components of the tool, right? It's all about these 3 different strategies. The first is internal alignment. It's basically just building, generating buy-in for social change work and social change priorities within the organization. That means bringing in all of your stakeholders, your board, your frontline service staff, volunteers, even people who are in your community to sort of move in lockstep towards those social change goals that you have as an organization. The second strategy is client voice, right? It's centering and building the leadership of the people that you serve. That's basically what it is like, what are some of the things that we need to incorporate leadership development as a sort of a strategy of our organization, so that we can share power and we can learn and we can implement changes that we need to see, that the folks that we serve are telling us we need to implement. And finally, collective action. All of the work that goes into social change work it can be a lot and can feel overwhelming, but the truth is you don't have to do it alone. In similar ways as to like our service goals, in which we sort of collaborate with different organizations for different outcomes, it's the same thing for collective action. But instead, we're thinking about how we're building power, either through the leadership development, how we're building power through crisis planning in the event of situations like we're seeing today on a daily basis, and so on, right? Building mutual aid support that builds power. The goals of the series as a whole, and the framework really are, the first goal is that we want to work with what organizations are already doing, tuning in and aligning social change work to the missions and the values and the capacity that organizations already have. Secondly, is to sort of deepen the relationships that organizations have in their ecosystems in a way that's framed around co-liberation and collaboration. Thirdly, we want to tap into that power. The greatest strengths are what the framework hones in on, right? The insights, the trust, and the connections to their own communities. And then finally, I think one of probably the most important ones that we have is sort of shift this narrative that service organizations are just charities. We're like these goody-goody nonprofits that are there because we have goodness in our hearts. That is true, but that they sort of put us on the side as not really being, as staying neutral or sort of passive to how to the things that are happening around us in the communities. So why now, right? Why is this sort of why are we focusing on this work? So from the 2008 financial crisis that impacted low-income communities with loss of employment, stability, the COVID-19 pandemic that almost feels like it was 25 years ago, a pandemic that lays bare so many inequities and resource gaps. Those sort of service organizations were there and responded and took action to fill in those gaps. Outside of times of crisis, service organizations are often the only thing standing between eviction, child hunger, domestic violence, and so many other injustices and barriers people face. They are also places for people to grow and process and learn and become the best version of themselves they can be as they navigate sort of life, right? So if folks want to share in the chat, we are 4 months into a new administration, but well in our way towards sort of more uncertainty, more criminalization, more fear, and retaliation. And these political conditions existed well before 2025. But the political will to harm the communities we serve is more present than ever. And the attacks to our sector are consistent with attempts to break up the power of service organizations and really the nonprofit sector as a whole. Really to push back against that. At BMP, just as the service providers who developed the framework, we strongly believe that we won't service our way out of these problems. Now more than ever, service organizations can play a really critical role in changing the status quo and moving the needle closer towards liberation of all of our communities. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Emily Rogers with the independent sector to sort of highlight what Emily's been observing and the independent sector has been observing about what sort of the nonprofit sector and how they see advocacy and lobbying and social change work as a whole.
Thanks, Exor. Yeah, so independent sector has commissioned research on nonprofit advocacy. We released 2 reports. The first, The Retreat of Influence, was based on a quantitative survey, and then the second, The Pursuit of Influence, was based on interviews with leaders of social service organizations. Just kind of a high-level overview of the methodology. The TLDR, it's a nationally representative sample. And then the qualitative methodology, again, this was done so that the sampling design should cover the variation that we're likely to see in the data. So we feel pretty confident about these results being representative of the sector. So I will go into some of the high-level findings. So in our survey, we learned that overall about 31% of nonprofits are engaged in advocacy or lobbying, or both, within the last 5 years, which is less than half of the percentage of nonprofits that reported doing that in 2000, which is the last year that we have nationally representative data on nonprofit advocacy up until this research came out. So essentially, over 2/3 of nonprofits report not engaging in advocacy or lobbying. And that's a lot of power left on the table. So of those 31% of nonprofits that are advocating, what do we know about them? So here's a breakdown by subsector. And I want to highlight human services organizations. And when I say human services, I also mean social services. Human services is just the particular research code that was used here. They make up a large portion of the nonprofit sector, about 1/3, but less than 1/3 of those organizations are engaging in advocacy or lobbying. And then highlighting the organizations that work in local areas. Even though organizations that work in those local areas, again, represent the largest segment of the sector, 46%, they demonstrate the lowest level of policy engagement apart from international organizations. So from the interviews, one of the big things that we learned was the very definitions of advocacy. So how do nonprofits define advocacy? One, advocacy encompasses many aspects, including some that may be inaccurately defined. So many nonprofit leaders seemed uncertain about the actions their organizations could legally take, or they made inaccurate statements such as nonprofits can't lobby. A few of the executive directors stated that they did not do advocacy or lobbying, but then they proceeded to describe activities that would qualify as advocacy. Advocacy is also mission-based and selective. Almost all of the nonprofit leaders were emphatic in stating that their advocacy involvement should be guided by their charitable mission. Advocacy is giving voice and empowering others to give voice. Most of the executive directors associated advocacy with giving voice to the needs and concerns of their clients. This central interest in voice directed both involvement in advocacy and who participated in that advocacy. And then fourth, it's accomplished through relationships and coalitions. So one of the most common refrains from nonprofits was that advocacy fundamentally relies on building relationships. In the stories that were shared in the interviews, relationships took many forms, one-on-one connections between nonprofits and local community members, state legislators, federal rulemakers, to coalitions of nonprofits working together on behalf of a common cause. So I want to highlight a couple of the quotes from the interviews. Again, advocacy is many things. The interviews showed that nonprofit leaders view advocacy as multifaceted, and it encompasses activities from fundraising and PR to lobbying and community outreach. The fact that there's such a broad perspective allows them to adapt strategies to best support their mission and their clients. Giving voice. The importance of involving clients directly in the advocacy process was shared by many nonprofit leaders. And then the intention to amplify their voices and empower them was central to their advocacy activities. They said that this approach not only enhanced the authenticity and impact of advocacy, but it helped bridge the gap between marginalized communities and decision makers. We also looked at motivating and discouraging factors for engaging in advocacy behavior. So from the survey, regardless of their current engagement in advocacy, the biggest barrier for nonprofits appears to be the perspective that it's not relevant to their mission, followed closely by tax law or IRS rules. And this is true across organizations of all sizes and nearly all subsectors. Speaking of subsectors, diving into those a bit more, I've put little stars where human services organizations are. So attitudes towards advocacy and policy are generally seen as positive, as encouraging factors. Mission is also an encouraging factor, like we learned. Government funding seems to have a neutral effect on most subsectors, but interestingly, the human services subsector does find it slightly encouraging. Additionally, as we saw on a couple slides ago, tax law and IRS rules, a pretty consistent discouraging across all organization sizes and subsectors. So looking more at kind of what's encouraging. Using mission as a North Star to guide nonprofit advocacy, it means that nonprofits must be selective concerning when, where, and why they engage in policy issues. So in the interviews, several nonprofit leaders described their selectivity about advocacy as staying in our lane. And by this, they meant that focusing on advocacy opportunities where they had specific expertise and on-the-ground knowledge, again, connecting it back to their mission. Resources and time as big barriers to advocacy. Among the nonprofit leaders interviewed, the most cited barrier was lack of capacity. So executive directors spoke about lacking time, lacking funding to engage in advocacy on top of day-to-day direct services, fundraising, and other organizational activities. And this was even true for organizations that did engage in advocacy. They also commonly cited a lack of knowledge or misunderstanding of the rules. Several leaders interviewed mentioned or displayed a lack of understanding of the laws and regulations related to nonprofit advocacy activities, such as how to navigate the policy process or identify effective policy solutions to complex structural issues. So in the interview research, we looked at the current state of partisan politics in the US and how that impacts nonprofit organizations and how they feel about advocacy. And, you all know that nonprofits must are navigating an increasingly polarized landscape that influences strategic decisions, operational adjustments, and advocacy efforts. Just a snapshot from the survey, we looked at advocacy activity across blue, red, or purple states. And there's distinctions in which states had higher rates of advocacy for nonprofits. And they suggest that the political climate of a state can significantly influence nonprofit behavior, potentially due to perceived risks or benefits of advocacy in those differing partisan environments. In the interviews, a common theme was the need to keep things bipartisan or nonpartisan. Many organizations emphasize the importance of this, not merely as like a philosophical commitment, but as a strategic necessity. The stance allowed them to navigate complex legislative environments, especially in states with a significant majority of one party. They appeared to strategically engage with policy issues that aligned with their core values, ensuring their advocacy efforts supported broad, inclusive goals rather than narrow partisan interests. And this careful selection process helped strengthen their reputations as balanced and committed to bipartisanship. They also mentioned the need to carefully navigate policy engagement. They wanted to ensure their advocacy efforts did not inadvertently align too closely with any political faction, wanting to avoid backlash or something that might impact their operational effectiveness. So this cautious approach was underscored by fears of political retaliation and the need to protect public image and nonprofit status. Nonprofit leaders explained that political retaliation was a real threat, especially when engagement with government officials involved politically charged issues. The fear that nonprofits harbored was not just about opposing political views, but also about potential consequences of being perceived as politically biased. We also looked at diversity, equity, and inclusion in advocacy engagement. So from the survey, we saw that nonprofit organizations located in low-income communities and communities of color are more likely to engage in public policy than other organizations, and that regardless of where they're located, about a third of nonprofits with programs that focus on people of color report being policy engaged, compared to a quarter of organizations that do not report having those programs. Similarly, organizations with programs focused on serving low-income individuals support higher rates of policy engagement, again, about a third, compared to organizations that do not have those programs. In terms of geography, organizations located in urban areas are more likely to engage in policy. It's worth noting that nearly half of nonprofits are located in suburban areas, and that area has the lowest advocacy lobbying engagement rates. So although a majority of nonprofits have a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement, only a third of them are engaging in policy activities to create more equitable systems. However, policy-engaged nonprofits' investment of time and resources in DEI activities is much higher than for nonprofits that aren't engaged in policy or advocacy. So one of the things that we saw in the interviews is that nonprofit leaders emphasized the importance of having governance that mirrors community diversity, which they said is vital to advocating for community-specific needs. They specified a commitment to governance that reflects the communities that they serve, ensuring their advocacy efforts are grounded in the needs of those communities. Several of the executive directors interviewed mentioned the significance of aligning the demographic composition of their board with the diverse demographics of their service recipients. Again, numerous interviews underscored the critical role of engaging with a variety of groups to ensure the effectiveness of advocacy initiatives. By actively listening to diverse voices within their communities, they said they added depth and relevance to those advocacy efforts, ensuring that they were not only inclusive, but also directly responsive to the real-life concerns of those who they sought to support. And then empowerment through representation. That came up a lot in the interviews. The idea that it ensures that perspectives of marginalized and underserved groups are not just included, but also central to the development of policies that affect their lives. So the engagement of these groups goes beyond just participation. It actively involves community members in shaping the dialogue and decisions that impact them directly, leading to a deeper connection between policy outcomes and the people that they affect. The leaders interviewed said this approach both empowered those directly affected by policies by giving them a platform, and also educated and influenced policymakers by showcasing real-world impacts of their legislative decisions. So that's a lot. I think the big question is where do we go from here? What did we learn from this research that it can inform what we do next? And there were 4 big cross-cutting themes that I want to highlight. The first is that relationships are central to advocacy. Executive directors interviewed emphasized the importance of building and maintaining strong relationships, specifically with government, where their deep knowledge of their communities is brought into policy discussions. And then that culture of active engagement supported through relationships can help nonprofits become more informed and aware of the importance of advocacy and how they can stay engaged. Another piece was having a seat at the table. Leaders repeatedly emphasized that it's important for them to have a seat at the table with government in order to overcome advocacy hurdles and strengthen support for the sector. They said they need opportunities to provide input and offer their expertise when important policy and decisions affecting the people they serve are made. The third is that advocacy should seek empowerment through representation. Nonprofits interviewed, they emphasized the importance of representation multiple times and lifted it up as a key element in successful advocacy. So directly involving clients and ensuring their voices are heard. They felt they can advocate more effectively for equitable policies. And then last is that advocacy coalitions play important roles. The leaders identified coalitions as a key strategy for overcoming barriers. And this was also shown in the survey work we did of nonprofits that belong to coalitions. Over half of them advocated, compared to only 12% of nonprofits that did not belong to coalitions. And then coalition members also report engaging in advocacy on their own at higher rates than non-members. So that's all that I have for you related to our research. I'll put the links to the reports in the chat if you want to dig in deeper.
Thank you so much, Emily, super insightful. And I'm excited to sort of get into this panel now with folks. I'm going to take a second to introduce our wonderful panelists. You've already met one of them. Emily Rogers is from the Independent Sector Manager of Policy Research, where she advances public policy research, development, and analysis that helps increase the capacity of nonprofits to fulfill their missions. We also have Sarah Marxer here from Oakland, Bay Area, as an evaluation policy specialist at Peers, envisioning and engaging recovery services. Sarah leads Peers' evaluation and policy advocacy efforts. She works on issues ranging from racial economic justice to education equity. So happy to have you here with us. And then finally, last but not least, we have Melissa Jakubowicz, who is with the Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth. They are the Chief of Development and Strategy, and also the co-founder of the movement to end youth homelessness in Nevada. Since joining Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth in 2011, Melissa has co-created the Southern Nevada Plan to end youth homelessness and the Southern Nevada Youth Homeless Needs Assessment, also playing a pivotal role in passing state legislation to remove barriers for youth experiencing homelessness. Thank you so much, our esteemed panel, for being here. I'm going to jump right into some questions. We're going to start with you, Sarah. So the work your organization does is really important, right? Peers is a peer-run mental health service that creates opportunities to support the overall sort of wellness of your program participants, but also deepens the connections they have with the community they live in as a whole. As critical as this programming is, I also understand that you are all navigating a political landscape that, long story short, has threatened the existence of this preventative care as a whole, but even maybe the sort of an existential crisis of organizations like yourselves throughout the entire state of California. Can you share with us how is Peers sort of responding to these challenges and these changes right now?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for that excellent question. I'll say that we participated in the Security to Wellbeing Framework learning cohort that happened late last winter and early spring a year ago, and it couldn't have been better timed for us because March was when, while the cohort was happening, was when the ballot measure passed in our state that really dramatic reorients mental health funding in a way that threatens community-driven, recovery-oriented programs like ours. And the framework and the tools were very, very useful for us in sharpening our analysis and kind of orienting ourselves in a rapidly changing landscape. And in particular, the power mapping tools and process helped us think through who actually has the power and authority to help ensure the survival of our organization and of peer-run services more broadly in our county in particular. And it helped us also analyze the constraints that decision maker is facing right now as well. And I think the clearest example of the way that it affected our practice is that we really had to rethink the way we communicate about who we serve and who we are. So in the peer movement, we avoid clinical and diagnostic language because it can be so stigmatizing, and because so many people just feel like that language doesn't describe their experiences, doesn't describe their identities. So for example, we talk about people with mental health challenges as opposed to mental illness. But with this big policy shift in the policy context, we had to look carefully at, with our mission in mind, if we're not communicating clearly that we actually are ourselves and are serving the people who are prioritized for services in the new policy landscape, which is people with severe mental illness, then we're not adequately moving toward our mission. So we had, as I said, we're a peer-run organization, so we all share lived experience, either ourselves or as family members or both. And we had some long and very helpful discussions about how we characterize what we're doing and with whom, so that now when we're engaging with decision makers, we are able to be much more clear about the kinds of lived experiences we're talking about, because mental health challenges can sound really mild, but we do serve and also share the lived experience of mental health challenges that can be disabling and has been disabling for many of our folks. So I feel like it sharpened our ability to respond, even though the situation is still evolving and there's a lot of uncertainty. So it's not like we don't know the end of our story yet, but it was very, very helpful.
Thank you, Sarah. And yes, Sarah and Peers, along with 10 other organizations, were part of our first cohort. That's what Sarah was mentioning. So happy that you're here with us, actually. Yeah, so happy that we were able to work together for all that time. Now moving on to our next question. This one's for you, Melissa. So your organization has been in the thick of sort of advocacy work for feels like a long time. Even when we were connected, you mentioned sort of this action around gathering and sending letters in response to executive orders. While we were sort of emailing while you were on your way to DC to advocate some more. And sort of, I want to go back in time a little bit and think about what had to change for you all as an organization, and how have you maintained and sustained social change work throughout the years, right? Like how did this all sort of happen, and what needed to change internally for your work?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And so just to give a tiny bit of background, so Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth, or NPHY, we are a direct service organization that provides comprehensive services to young people experiencing homelessness in the Las Vegas community. And so we've been around since 2001 doing a lot of direct service work, transitional housing, rapid rehousing, outreach, crisis intervention, drop-in center, case management, et cetera, right? Very holistic services for our young people. But our mission is to eliminate homelessness among Nevada's youth, right? And as we've been working on this mission for many, many years, we just kept facing the fact, right, that our young people were facing barriers that we could not eliminate on an individual level, right? That these were things that had systemic root causes, and that the only way we were going to really make traction toward moving toward our mission was really to address the issue of youth homelessness, both from an individual direct service lens and from a higher level systems social change lens, right? And so through doing this work, we just really just came to believe that social change work was indispensable to the work of our mission. And so by making that decision as an agency, we have made a lot of difficult decisions since then in just how we function and how we operate and what we prioritize, because we believe so firmly, and we've now kind of, the way we talk about our agency, the way we understand our agency, the way we make prioritizations of resources, et cetera, that we now believe that working towards social change work is as important to our mission as the direct services that we offer. And so we've really dived into this social change work since about 2017. But it is very interesting learning about the security to well-being framework, because it is exactly what we did, looking back at it. So we began with that internal buy-in, right? Making that decision as an agency at all levels that this social change work was the work of accomplishing our mission. And then we really, of course, worked with client voice. This was something we were hearing from our young people. We developed a variety of different ways to work with our young people, to develop leadership skills, to uplift their voices, to empower them. And they've been involved in every step of every advocacy process that we've pursued since then. And then collective action. So you mentioned that we launched something called the Movement to End Youth Homelessness in Nevada. So as a direct service organization called Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth, we kind of gave a moniker and an umbrella to that systems level advocacy work that we do. And we use that to sort of understand that work, right? Whether that's policy advocacy, whether that's regional planning initiatives that we're leading systems transformation work at a local or regional or state level, whether that's we have an annual summit every year where we bring cross-sector partners together around this work, et cetera, et cetera. It's all under that moniker that we call the Movement to End Youth Homelessness in Nevada. And that has really helped us also to obtain external buy-in and building a coalition across the community, right? To have people join us and be a part of this movement work. And something that we did at the very, very beginning of this work, which was really important, was not just the internal buy-in, but also working on finding some core initial cross-sector stakeholders who could join us in this journey and who have been with us for all of these years working on these goals, right? And so what we were able to do was, at the beginning, once we had established this direction of our agency and our strategic planning and our focus and our willingness to devote time toward this issue, we sought some funders that understood this issue, right? And for us, it might be funny to people all over the country, but coming from Las Vegas, we found a casino partner who actually was able to help us from the very beginning, right? So we were able to find a private funder who understood this and believed in this issue and was willing to join us on this journey to become a co-presenting sponsor of our summit that we have every year and support us in this movement work in a variety of different ways. So having a relationship with a private funder that understands and supports this was extremely helpful in this process for us. And with them, we've built that coalition so much more over time, working with local media, working with our actual local university system as well, other education systems, et cetera, and just building that coalition. And I think that to be honest, the decision at the beginning, we did not have the resources devoted to this work, but we decided that it was so important that we were going to do the work anyway, right? So we definitely did make some decisions to do this work on top of our regular obligations, right? And on top of our regular schedules and whatnot. But the thing is that devoting that time, devoting those resources at the beginning allowed us to prove the success of this work. We were accomplishing things. We were able to get state laws passed. We were able to shed a light on this issue. We were able to change conversations in our community about this issue. And through being able to show results and movement around this, we were able to get more support, get more funders on board, get more partners on board, that is now enabling us to structure our organization in a way where we actually can finally have resources and capacity that's devoted specifically to this issue. So definitely, I would say it's a lot about the internal buy-in and yeah, and a lot about then building that coalition and led by the people that you're serving.
So much to chew on there, Melissa. Thank you for all of your work. And so exciting. And also, I think, you know, this piece of you're saying you found the right partner, like a private funder and stuff, that through our cohort work, and I mean, through even the research that we've been having here at BMP, like one of the biggest barriers to engaging in social change work intentionally has been funding. The way grants are set up for service providers and human service agencies are tied to government agencies or philanthropy that are sort of metric and service oriented and leave very little room to sort of what else is out there, right? So it's challenging to go out and try this work out. I'm gonna move on to our next question with Emily here. So the independent sector's two last reports, right? The Retreat of Influence and the Pursuit of Influence. I feel like we have a relationship with the Retreat of Influence because you all launched that report, and then that's what we were like, and the sort of on the eve of launching our first cohort applications, and sort of the sort of the synergy that exists there is great, and I'm happy we've been able to still sort of talk after all these years. Both of those reports were focusing on these questions of like nonprofits engaging in advocacy and lobbying, you know, quote unquote. And you also work with a council of nonprofits, right, that has a finger on sort of the pulse of what's happening on the ground, sharing what challenges and even what recommendations they have for the sector as a whole. From all of this, sort of what are you learning from the sector regarding their appetite, right, for engaging in this type of work in our current political climate?
Yeah, we're recognizing that there's this tension for nonprofits between understanding the need to do this type of work now more than ever, and a real fear of retaliation, whether it be loss of funding, concerns about their 501(c)(3) status, damage to their reputations. So, you know, there is an appetite for it. They're very hungry, but you know, they're afraid it's going to make them sick. And it's a really challenging position to be in. But, you know, it's important to remember that the vast majority of the public does trust nonprofits, even if there's other voices that are louder right now, and that legally nonprofits can engage in advocacy work. One of the biggest fears is around the lack of understanding of the rules and what they can and can't do. Luckily, there's a lot of resources out there that exist. Boulder Advocacy has an incredible resource library that has state-specific information. State nonprofit associations are also really good resources. And the National Council of Nonprofits has a directory of those. And at Independent Sector, we're in the process of building a tool, a searchable database of coalitions. And of course, the Security to Wellbeing framework and the cohort program at BMP are an incredible resource to help nonprofits kind of combat that fear with information.
Thanks, Emily. And this one's kind of going off the cuff a little bit. I'm gonna just ask this from you all. Anyone can sort of chime in here, but there's this big question that's especially with, like, let's say an example of Melissa's, right, where some of the work has culminated in big sort of state campaign work and law and like changing laws, right? And that's sort of the way that we sort of think about it on the spectrum of social change, that feels like it's all the way at the sort of like, this is like big sort of big work, right? But can folks maybe share a little bit about sort of the work that it takes to get there, and sort of how that sort of is part of the calculus of how social change happens, and that work and share a little bit about how that work plays a role in getting to those sort of big wins, or sort of those big sexy battles that we hear about at the state legislature and the like.
I can start with the answer if that's okay. Yeah, I think I also want to say that for us when it comes to state legislation change and all of that, right? That these the types of changes that we pursued are things that came from our social workers and case managers and our young people identifying barriers that they were facing and then working to break down barriers and that sometimes these barriers had no funding attached to them. For example, one of the state laws that we worked on was about medical and healthcare rights for unaccompanied minors to be able to consent for services without parental consent if a young person was unaccompanied and experiencing homelessness and separate from their guardians. So something like that, right? That doesn't you don't need the state legislature to approve funding. You don't need things around identification documents, et cetera, other things like that. Sometimes they're something that a lot of people just don't even realize could be a barrier, including a lot of legislators don't even know a barrier like this might be existing and that it's something that could be fixed in a way that doesn't require necessarily state resources or et cetera, et cetera. And so understanding those needs on the ground from the direct service staff, from the constituents that you're serving, et cetera, and being able to communicate things that are actually quite simple, things about getting an identification document, things about, being able to go to a healthcare provider without a fear of the healthcare provider then being sued or, things like that. There's so many things like that a lot of people in the community just don't know. So educating people around those types of barriers can result in that. And it is exactly like you said, so much about relationship building, working on ideas of things that could be changed and then building those relationships and sharing that and educating people and making yourself known in the community, calling your legislatures, and just making yourself known that if then they encounter something that reminds them of your issue or they have a question about, they know to call you and talk to you about that. So it's a lot of, relationship building and figuring out the barriers and communicating around those barriers in a clear way.
I think I would add one. Melissa's story is very, very inspiring. And then, like from my experience, the piece about the daily work that is, sometimes builds towards big wins, but that is important regardless. That comes from our experience and is echoed by what Melissa said. Is in our program model, at the heart of everything we do is developing the leadership of people with lived experience of mental health challenges and providing we're not just providing a service, but we're always placing our participants at the center of decision making, of program design, of program implementation in many cases, so that then the leap to advocacy is more like a step than a leap.
I love that, Sarah. That was great. More of a step than a leap. That's great. So we are getting pretty close here to the hour. We're going to go a little bit over. So if folks need to drop off, that's totally fine. But I'm going to close our panel out now with one final question for everyone. So collectively, you all share so many insights and knowledge, right, of how the different ways that social change can show up in direct service work. And how you navigate it on a daily basis, right? We're in a particular moment in time that is challenging us to sort of rethink and pivot how we operate, how we adapt to this uncertainty and for the current administration and their proxies that show up virtually in every layer of government and sort of engagement that organizations have. So I'd like you all to sort of think about that for a second and share what you think the role service providers can play, not only to see us through this crisis, but build something better for sort of the future that we hope to see.
I have two things I want to say about that. That's okay. One is that for those of us who've been working in direct services for a long time, I really think we're called to unshackle our imaginations because functioning for some of us for decades in situations where we don't have enough for our communities, our families, for all the things that we care about, can just shackle our imaginations. And I think we're called at this moment to really remind ourselves and each other that it actually is possible to build a world where we can all thrive, not just to like fight for a little bit less than enough. And I wanted to share, Scott Nakagawa of the 22nd Century Initiative recently wrote about the role of direct service providers in fighting authoritarianism. And just to paraphrase a little bit of what he said, and I'll put a link in the chat if people want to read more, but he reminds us that we are not just caregivers and bureaucrats. We are the backbone of our democracy's social infrastructure. We see firsthand the impact of policy on real people, and we witness, and I would add that many of us experience, the devastation caused by austerity, privatization, mass incarceration, and the billionaire takeover of public services. We are some of the most trusted voices in our communities, and when we organize, we become a force that authoritarians cannot ignore. So I would just want to, close by asking us to think about our power, and not just the things that are, legitimately frightening us right now.
Sarah, you stay dropping gems. Thank you, Wing T, for sharing the link in the chat, and also Sarah.
I could go next. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Sarah said, and that also very inspiring way of saying that. Thank you so much for that. 100% agree. And I think also that it's important to keep in mind that not only does our work have a huge amount of power and an incredible need that's just growing every single day, but our knowledge has a huge amount of power as well. And we have knowledge that our constituents and the people we're serving and us as direct service providers have that a lot of other people don't have and need right now. And I wanted to share a quick story about something that surprised me and may surprise a lot of us in terms of how we understand the people in power working and where their power comes from. That, for example, I recently had a meeting with an office, a worker in a US Senate office, right? And the person was asking me about, how are we being affected by everything going on, right? And I shared a variety of different things from, federal project officers that we work with suddenly being fired, now us not knowing who to ask questions to, or like, to different things like Doge sending out forms where you have to justify your expenses and your grants to them and things like this. And the person that we were speaking to didn't know about any of these things, and let me know that our congressional representatives and our senators are actually having a lot of trouble getting information from the executive branch on what is actually happening. And that they were sharing that the only way they're actually finding out information is from their constituents, that they're not finding out how nonprofits and direct service providers are being treated or how things are actually happening on the ground from those departments of the US government or from their peers in the executive branch or anything like that. They're finding out a lot of these things directly from the people impacted. And that's the only way they're able to gather the information. So sharing that information with your congressional delegation and other people in power, that might be the only way they can know how you're being affected. So definitely don't assume they know. It seems like they should know, but a lot of them don't. So definitely be sure to share that information with them on anything that's happening to affect you from all the change.
Yeah, I think the point that Melissa and Sarah make about service organizations having power is a really important one. We also do research on public trust, and Americans trust nonprofits to do the right thing more than any other institution. And they also trust nonprofits to reduce national divisions more than they trust corporations, the government, or the media. So there's a lot of power that comes with that. And service organizations, they're what the public thinks of when they think of nonprofits. So by visibly serving their communities, they're building trust for the entire sector, which is particularly crucial now, given all the vocal attacks characterizing nonprofits as wasteful or corrupt. And when we think about the idea of building a better future, one of the things that sticks out to me is that volunteerism is an incredible way to build trust. And one of the things we also learned from our research is that over half of folks are more likely to volunteer with a nonprofit that educates lawmakers about the needs of their local community, that advocates for issues impacting underserved populations, or provides resources to help them reach out. So I think there's a huge opportunity here for service providers to capitalize on all the wonderful things they're already doing, or make, tiny changes to help us get through this moment while laying a strong foundation for the future.
Wow. No words. Hard to follow that up. Feeling so full from all the gems that were dropped. Thank you to our wonderful panel for everything that they just shared. And thank you all to everyone still here. We have a quick sort of maybe 2-3 minutes left. I know we're at the hour, so if folks need to hop off, feel free to do so. But we would like to share that, we're jumping right into, if you could actually go to the next slide. We want to share more information on this cohort that Sarah Marxer and peers were a part of, and 9 other organizations were a part of, where sort of we took steps to sort of give information and share knowledge and tools and resources so that folks can feel empowered to embark on social change work. So we're inviting service providers who are here, or funders or capacity builders who want to share this out to other service providers. Please do so. If you go to the next slide, we are opening up this cohort to all service organizations who, again, want to introduce or increase their social change work or capacity, learn about ways to implement the 4 key strategies of the framework that we shared earlier, and keep going. Connect across other issue areas and so on. So there's a lot of really wonderful work happening, and the applications are open right now. We opened them this month, and we're going to be closing them by May 17th, and we'll be reviewing applications on a rolling basis. What the cohort looks like, if you can go to the next slide, the schedule is, from June 12th to July 24th. It's going to be 1 session every 2 weeks, about 2.5 hours each session, in which we dive into each of the different modules, which we'll review in a second. And sort of, I think, the real meat and potatoes of this cohort is the technical assistance that happens after. It is about 2 to 3 hours of highly individualized, either high and low touch sort of support that organizations can then take the lessons and implement them in real time to some of the circumstances or conditions of their communities and their needs. The way the sessions are broken up are into 4 different sessions, right? The intro to the framework, then we have what we are calling theory of social change and internal alignment, client voice, collective action. And then the last one is sort of putting all of these ideas and lessons and creating an action plan in which we can sort of implement these things in a way that makes sense for you all. We're really excited about the space. This is the second cohort that we're doing, and we're hoping to have refined it from the first, and we hope to continue offering these cohorts to the sector. I think we're dropping some links in the chat for the FAQ, if you want to share that around with people in your organization, if you need leadership to look at it and all that good stuff, and also the application, again, which is going to be closing on May 17th. I just want to close us out by saying thank you to, again, all of our panelists for the wonderful things that they shared with us, and especially Emily Rogers, also, who shared so much insights and knowledge from what they've been gathering at the independent sector. And last but not least, my BMP colleagues, Wing T and Jazz, for holding it down on the back end to make sure that this webinar runs smoothly. And finally, you, everyone who's still here, everyone who attended earlier, thank you for taking the time and out of your day to learn about this opportunity. If you want to stay in touch, feel free to reach out. My email's right there. You'll be receiving an email after this, I think in about a week, with all the links and everything that was shared. So we hope to stay in touch as we get ready to launch the second cohort. So that's it. Thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful day.